So Games Workshop have a new logo with the blandness turned up to 11. Discount retailers in the UK have an enormous overstock of the new Horus Heresy box set, leading it to be sold at some absolutely rock bottom prices. The old style Space Marine Drop Pod is back on sale once again. And let's talk through a whole bunch of other Games Workshop and Warhammer teasers, reveals, and minor news things. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking through a whole bunch of minor Warhammer 40k news that I didn't really think needed an entire video all to itself, but nonetheless I found interesting over the past week. All the stuff I just mentioned, plus some minor model reveals from Games Workshop, weirdness with Saturnine Terminator packaging, and a few more bits. Let's start with Games Workshop's logo though, where this one isn't exactly a new change, but maybe something that's been gradually more noticed over the past year or so. It just seemed to surface quite a lot in social media discussion over the past week. I saw some big Reddit threads discussing it, and I had a couple of people message me about it. Basically, it looks like the big yellow and red Games Workshop logo at the top is on its way out, and everywhere that they had that logo, they've been gradually replacing it with this one in the middle. As best I can tell, this isn't exactly an enormously new thing. They have had that new logo on packaging for quite some time now. For example, I've got a box of the Kill Team Wreckers. They have the new style logo on that. I believe that the one that was getting shared around Reddit was from their job site with the logo in the top left hand corner. The main initial reaction that people tend to have to it is that the new one is just very bland, just a pretty basic looking spiky font, and overall just feels a lot less like a logo versus someone just having typed out the company name. Compared with the big chunky, fairly distinctive yellow and red one on the top, which maybe does have a bit of a retro feel these days, though I wouldn't say that's necessarily a bad thing. I kind of wonder if this one's a bit more intentional as part of their overall rebrands towards basically trying to phase out the name Games Workshop from public perception as much as possible. Basically everything that they own that had Games Workshop on it has been gradually being replaced just by the word Warhammer. We had that happen gradually on their stores over the last couple of decades, when the time came for facelifts, rebranding them from Games Workshops to Warhammer stores, and then in more recent times we had the Games Workshop web store fully relaunched as the Warhammer web store. It perhaps feels like making their logo more diminished and looking far less like a logo. It perhaps might be playing into Games Workshop being the company name and Warhammer being the name that they want people to talk about them and their things. I guess maybe the idea is to slim down on complexity from people trying to generally have an understanding of what they are. I certainly say that for someone who's literally never heard of Warhammer or Games Workshop, if you saw that on a store on the side of the street, you'd probably guess that a place called Games Workshop would sell multiple different games, like a whole bunch of board games or something. So maybe a little bit of a misnomer when the vast majority of what they do are Warhammer miniatures now. I don't know if it's also trying to get people to refer to them as Warhammer as opposed to Games Workshop, and that way there'd be no distinction between them and their product. It still doesn't seem like they're trying to completely do away with it. For example, that Jobs website does have the name Games Workshop pretty prominently and refers to themselves as that throughout. It is their actual company name, I suppose. Let me know your thoughts on the old logo versus the new though. Any positives for going modern and fading into the background? And what do you make of the Warhammer versus Games Workshop names? Next up, another thing that's been really quite widely discussed over the past week has been the discounting of the Saturnine box set in the UK, where perhaps more so than any other Warhammer starter set, it looks like certain ambitious discount retailers have been absolutely swamped by supply. They've basically chosen to order in a huge amount of them and then wound up not selling anywhere near as much as they hoped to. It feels like the general internet take is that the Horus Heresy 3rd edition has caused the box set sales to tank, but looking at the numbers I'm really not too sure that that's the case. I'm sure it's been a factor, but by my polls on the channel it looks like around about 9% worth of Warspets Tactics channel viewers picked one of these box sets up. As it goes, that's at least a fairly impressive number, not really enormously far behind things like the Space Wolves army set and the Blood Angels army box, both fairly major releases for Warhammer 40k in their own way. It feels like to have numbers at least somewhat similar to that isn't too bad going, given that I focus on 40k releases and only really talk about Heresy from the point of looking over the fence and seeing the shiny Space Marines from the 30k setting. Obviously it's not doing the numbers of an enormous great big Warhammer 40k edition start box set, but I think you wouldn't really expect it to either, given that vastly more people play 40k than Heresy. Horus Heresy sitting at I think 4th most popular game mode depending on how you count them, 40k Kill Team and Age of Sigmar all beating it. Obviously there's lots of factors that might have led to this having slightly less demands than people might have thought, in particular the drama around the Horus Heresy 3.0 with lots of units having gone to Legends, plus the core rules updates not being what everyone wanted, plus a bunch of minor factors, things like the models not being quite as directly usable in 40k compared with some. The Heresy sets are Games Workshop's most expensive launch boxes, so people might have been taken aback by the price. There's no real rush to get this one, as it's not a fear of missing out launch box. And I guess not literally everyone loves the retro appeal of the Saturnine Terminators. Overall, between all those though, a bunch of discount retailers just don't seem to have correctly anticipated demand, and at the same time it's been one of the rare cases where Games Workshop seems to have given discount retailers as many box sets as they wanted. Often you hear anecdotes of them asking for 100 box sets of any given type, and then Games Workshop sending them 3 or something. But this time if you went in with a high order at Games Workshop for these ones, then it looks like you absolutely got it. To my understanding, it also tends to be a bit of a negotiation as well, with Games Workshop advocating for stores to take more stock of certain box sets they've got loads of. In any case, it seems that some stores put in just enormously higher numbers than actually got sold, and certainly in the UK it's led to those stores that have an enormous surplus of these vastly slashing prices so they can try and clear their enormous surplus. There do seem to be a few discount retailers that are doing this. For a channel affiliate example, Wayland Games in the UK seems to be doing them at 35% off at the moment. So a Saturnine box set that from Games Workshop would cost £195 is now going for £127, so an extra 15% greater than what they'd normally sell them for. And I guess that's probably somewhere around break-even style prices, or even might be taking small losses. I'll leave them linked down in the video description, as ever any purchases through them help to support Allspec's tactics, but it is interesting that just anecdotally I've heard a whole bunch of different groups of people who I chat to have suddenly been very tempted to pick up a box set of this, including people who previously didn't really have any interest in it. As best I can tell though, there's not too many examples of people doing similar in different countries around the world, though please let me know in the comments if there are. I must admit I'd probably count myself alongside the people who are being tempted by this one. I think I'd be most tempted for 40k proxies. I did a video with some thoughts around using the box set for Warhammer 40k a couple of weeks back, and the Saturnine Terminators could make some fairly fun, uncorrupted style obliterators, maybe for something like Iron Warriors or Alpha Legion. And I quite like the look of the Crusade Armor Marines. I think it's really quite a fun armor mark that they've done well here. Even just taking those 2 elements of the box, that could mean that you'd have 3 sets of 2 Iron Warrior Obliterators, then 40 Marines with bolters that maybe you could acquire some bits elsewhere to arm them with some legionary style things, maybe using the Centurion as a Chaos Lord or something. Even just going by those 3 elements of the box set, that'd be a 1200 point army for Warhammer 40k. Then potentially go about reselling the rest. At current prices, it looks like you could easily get something like 50 quid or so between a Dreadnought, the platform, the book, the disintegration weapons, and the Saturnine Praetor. Potentially that could be a lot of effective Chaos Space Marines for around £75 or so. That's put it to 11 points per dollar essentially within the UK, 16 points per pound, and in theory land at least could be one of the very cheapest ways to get a bunch of points on the board for an army right now. I'm not 100% sure whether I'll actually jump aboard that. As normal I do have more painting projects on the go than I probably should, but it is very tempting. Let me know your thoughts on the box set prices though. Have you been tempted by this one? Before we move on to the rest of the news roundup, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, Inlighter Creatives Terrain. They're a relatively new wargame and terrain supplies company that launched their first few creations earlier in the year, aiming for things to have some fun looking 40k tables, their main offering being some die-cut terrain pieces compliant with the WTC and marked out battle mats. They ship to the UK, USA and Canada. For their terrain set, they've got an £120 or $160 Ashfall Citadel terrain set, 4 big ruins, 6 small ones, some armoured containers, and some terrain footprint markers. The terrain itself is made from die-cut wood that comes pre-coloured, so it's looking really quite good straight out of the box. It can go together glue-free if desired, though of course nothing wrong with gluing it. The design is some fairly fun-looking, moody and very weathered-looking ruins with the dimensions here on the screen, and they do pretty well for functional terrain. Otherwise, they've got a whole bunch of WTC compatible Warzone terrain mats, currently sold for $80 or £62, which is pretty competitive for those. They have a grid layout and the 40k deployments marked down. There's a few different versions of them. They've got a fun Adamant Bastion one bit set up like a city and one like a desert, and a Gloom Moor one without the deployment zones on. Here's a few other close-ups of them. As with a few other things, they're made of synthetic leather, maybe a little mass mat feeling, and having pre-measured stuff could speed up some games. They also have a kill team style one too. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. You can check them out linked in the video description. Next up, I was interested to see that the old style Space Marine drop pods are going back on sale, this time aimed at Horus Heresy, but you're still going to be able to buy the same plastic kit if you prefer the look of that one to the new terrain style one. It really hasn't been long since Games Workshop updated the 40k model for the drop pod. The reception was a bit mixed. You do get 2 in a box, and the cost per pod is lower priced compared with the previous one, and they are easier to build than they were before. This one's certainly not impossible, though I wasn't the biggest fan of the kit construction compared with some, but coming with the downside of being treated more like a simple terrain piece, monopose, and you can't open and close the doors, which perhaps subtracted from the story of the miniature, putting them down and then opening the doors out. People seem to have a lot to say about the rules for it and whether or not they were a problem before, or Games Workshop trying to dumb down and simplify models for the rules. I feel like that was a bit of a nothing burger. The rules certainly didn't feel problematic in any way to me before. Though I did quite like the updated rule on the datasheet that you measure to the central pod and not the doors. That just seems to make a bit more sense, really. Kinda good to know that if you're a fan of the old ones though, you'll still be able to get those. As mentioned, they're going to be a Legion Astartes, a drop pod now, so aimed at the Heresy. But given they're pretty well the same model as the 40k ones, no real reason that you couldn't use them there in more casual games. And maybe it seems like the best of both worlds if people have the choice. In terms of the size and shape of them, the classic one is significantly bigger when unfurled, but obviously smaller when it's all closed together. For 40k rules purposes, you measure to the central element of the pod and not to the unfurled bits. But I guess it could have some rules implications as to where they could set up. I guess if you had the doors all closed for the original Space Marine one, then it might be able to physically fit in places where the new one can't. So I'd guess that things like grand tournaments and things would probably use the new one. For more casual games though, I can't imagine that the majority of people are really going to care too much about one versus the other, provided you're not trying to do gamey things to gain big rules advantages with them at least. In any case though, it feels like kind of a win that they're coming back. I don't think that this will be reactionary or anything like that. I don't think Games Workshop have the capacity to see drama one week and then have a model release ready to go the next. They have a far longer lead time than that. So basically this one will have always been the plan to keep the original model around for Horus Heresy, but I guess update it for Warhammer 40k. It really does seem like they want to be separating out their ranges absolutely as much as possible. For a slightly minor release that might be of interest to some people, it looks like they temporarily have the chapter-approved mission decks back in stock in the USA and Canada. Games Workshop have been really sketchy about keeping these in stock for the last couple of them. It was a bit disappointing that after the Pariah Nexus ones, they also wound up not having enough of these to go around when they launched. Just feels a bit embarrassing for them. For 40k being their biggest and best selling game, and this being their main pushed way to play it, only to have it go live and then nobody be able to buy it for extended periods of time. I'm not sure how long it will be back in stock in North America. My guess is that it'll probably sell out again, but who knows. In the meantime though, I thought I'd just give you the heads up that it's back temporarily. For last week's Warhammer 40k releases, we had the Black Templars, Grey Knights, the Space Wolves and the Tyranid Combat Patrols. Seems that for the most part there weren't the biggest dramas around the release for those. In terms of things being in stock, looks like at least from the Games Workshop web store, the vast majority of those are available in all areas. It only looks like the Sanctic Conclave Battle Force box set, this one picture for the Grey Knights, that's sold out in North America. I guess as per normal, for these limited Battle Force box sets, they must have absolutely tiny numbers for it, given that this one seems to be vastly less popular versus the non-Grey Knight Combat Patrols. Obviously, any given discount retailer might be out of stock of any one item depending on how many they ordered and how many people went to them for that. But it feels like in most regions you should be able to find most of the things that they went on sale at discount. As ever, the channel ones are links down in the video description if you wanted to support Auspex Tactics with any purchases. Next up, one thing that caught my eye was an article published by a site called Wargamer that says that Games Workshop have basically made their White Dwarf editor redundant and weren't planning on replacing them. That feels at least fairly surprising news for Games Workshop's Warhammer Focus magazine, which I can't help but think is probably an asset to them overall, just given that it's all about drumming up hype for the hobby and with a strong focus on new products that they're trying to sell you. According to the article that I'll link below, he'd been at the helm for it for 6 years, and it was due to a corporate restructure of some sort. I don't know whether the White Dwarf magazine might be under a different branch of marketing or something like that. I'd be very surprised if they outright cancelled it, but certainly means there could be some big shake-ups for the magazine in terms of content, I suppose. Obviously, I'm not too sure about the overall context for that, whether or not it is a good business thing from Games Workshop, or if it's something that loses them a lot of money. I guess it has just ridiculously low engagement versus, say, Warhammer Community with the news that they publish online. I kind of wonder if there'd be any chance they'd decide to make the content digital at some stage. Talking of White Dwarfs though, they revealed the next one for that. That's a Space Marine focused one, which they give a hint to in their previous teasers. Looks like Lieutenant Titus is on the cover fighting with Tyranids. There's some things like some lore on dreadnoughts and a big section on chapter creation and a bunch of symbols, logos and names for a vast amount of other ones. For 40k rules content though, it seems that there's a Space Marine Operations game mode, aiming to invoke some co-op operations from the Space Marine 2 video game. I guess with a small team of players pitted against an environmental enemy. Looks like they've got 3 guys fighting against some Tyranids there. I'll certainly be interested enough to talk through that in brief on the channel. Kind of sounds a little bit like the co-op version of Kill Team that they had going, but this time with a focus on just literally 3 Space Marines against a horde. Apparently the free miniature of the month from Games Workshop stores is a Bloodclaw. If you happen to live near a Warhammer store, then you might be able to drop in and pick one up. Apparently these will be available from the 2nd of August. Maybe not too bad an offering as a full-size Space Marine miniature. Usually when bought separately they're £4 or $6 a model. They may be a little bit less precious than some given they've been in multiple discount box sets already. If you're dropping by and you're able to call in to collect one, then it could be interesting enough for a small painting project. As ever with these ones, I probably wouldn't travel too far out of the way. How many there are available might depend on the stock they have sent out and how fast people come in to collect them. And some stores do have a requirement for you to assemble the miniature in stores, but some just allow you to literally grab the model and go on. On Games Workshop's Sunday preview, alongside that Drop Pod, there's a bunch of the Saturnine stuff coming out. At least 2 of them were maybe a little bit more interesting than the rest. We already had the Mark II Crusade Armoured Marines on sale individually, but basically everything else that was in the box is now on sale as an individual kit too. They'll be going up for pre-order on the 2nd of August. I guess that maybe the majority of these might have slightly limited interest just due to the big box and people reselling from that. But if you did just literally want one miniature out of the box set, then it could be interesting enough. Maybe for people who wanted the Saturnine Dreadnoughts to paint up as a painting project perhaps. Depending on where you are around the world though, I'd probably check eBay or other second-hand places. There might be a chance that you could find what you wanted for cheaper than Games Workshop. For the most interesting things though, it looks like the Saturnine Dreadnought has its different loadout released already. I believe this one's the conversion beam and grav weapon, I want to say. It's called the Opion pattern, and they're also going to have the 2 weapon sprues available individually. You can slot them in and out and change them around if you wanted to. I guess having the alternative weapon sprue might be of interest to some people who have Saturnine Dreadnoughts from the big box. Otherwise though, the thing that surprised me the most were that the Saturnine Terminators appears to be on sale in box sets of 4. They had to be in some sort of multiples of 2, I suppose, given that there's 2 Terminators per sprue, but still this one's really quite surprising given they come in 3s or 6s. Just seems odd that if you wanted 6 Terminators, you basically have to get 2 boxes of them, and then be wound up with 8 and you can't quite field the next squad of 3. To put them on the board, you'd have to have 2 sort of mid-sized squads, and if you wanted some full ones, I guess you'd be going up to 3 sets of 4. Just feels like a bit of an unusual decision. I was expecting them to be in quite an expensive box, but to have 6 of them in there, as opposed to presumably a slightly cheaper one for 4. Finally, from a small model reveal earlier today, there's some new bugs for Necromunda. These ones are Ashwing Hellamites apparently. If you want some great big disturbing space dragonfly style things, then these guys could be for you. All sorts of nasty fauna out there in the ash waste, I suppose. It looks like there's 2 of these guys, I'd guess in Forge World resin, and they look like they have an optional flight stand, depending on whether or not you want them crawling across the floor, mounted on terrain, or soaring through the air. I wonder if they could maybe have some fun use for Tyranids players, or some fun pets for the Genestealer cults, even if the aesthetic is quite different. In any case though, I'll leave that one there for now. Let me know your thoughts on all the things talked about. What do you make of Games Workshop's new logo? Would you be tempted by Horus Heresy box sets at a steep discount? And let me know your thoughts on new Drop Pods, White Dwarf things, and all the rest. As mentioned, a big thank you to Lighter Creative for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check out their battle mats and terrain sets linked down in the video description if you'd like to. As mentioned, they ship within the USA, UK, and Canada. I'll leave that there for now though. A big thank you for listening. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out each day. If you've been enjoying videos on the channel, I'll just mention that the channel does have a Patreon page as well. You can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to support there. Channel patrons get some advantages such as seeing certain videos early, occasional votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening though, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.